What's going on, guys? No pleasantries today. No music. Just hopping in on here on a bonus episode of Racially Speaking. Welcome if it's your first time. I'm your host, David Phipps. And look, I've taken a minute. Maybe you guys have been looking out for this episode. I don't know. I'm no expert on today's topic, but I don't think that most of you come to me for expert advice per se, but more relatable, quasi in the moment uh, thoughts and questions as we wrestle with sometimes the latest topic or news story or just some ongoing thoughts about how to navigate this thing called racial justice. Um, as somebody who's not per se a quote unquote expert on all these topics, especially today's topic, I am well researched, well thought out, and have my foot in a lot of conversations and in a lot of doors where I get to talk to a lot of experts. And I often have experts here on the podcast with me. And then the multiple hats I wear with my vocations, I get to kind of be a quasi expert. But that's, enough of my credentials. If you've listened to me for any amount of time, you know kind of the backdrop of where I'm at and where I'm coming from. Racially speaking, we ought to talk about this, guys. Voting rights. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 is, from what I can tell, gone ish or in very real danger of that actually being a reality. I don't know how much of you guys have been keeping up with this topic outside, maybe looking for this podcast episode to come out. First, I highly encourage you to not always wait on me to put something out, because there are some very well researched and much more eloquent and thorough things to listen to. But I encourage you to use this podcast as kind of a complementary space as you research other quote unquote experts. Here's some thoughts. Um, sorry, I got something in my eye. I think voting is maybe the most basic thing that we remember from elementary school, grade school, learning about when it comes to progress as far as racial justice goes, or justice in general goes. It's kind of one of the bedrock things I think about, despite all the critiques of, oh, I didn't learn this in school growing up, I didn't learn that in school growing up, our schools didn't teach us X, Y, and Z. I think voting is not one of those things. I think voting is usually the basic human right in America that we pat ourselves on the back about getting to the point of. Women's suffrage, ending slavery, getting past the Three-Fifths Compromise, equality, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, justice for all, right? These are some of the taglines we are told and are just embedded in all of our minds if we grew up in America, or even if we didn't. That's what I think we want people to view America as. At least my generation, as we've grown up, we've wanted that to be what we're known for. Inclusive, diverse, right? Everyone thriving, come, this is the land of the free, land of opportunity, home of the brave, all those kinds of catchy phrases about who we are. So it's, in a lot of ways, to me, time to hit the panic button. And, you might be listening and thinking, well, there's been a myriad of other times where we should have already hit the panic button. And I would not disagree with that. But I think there's reason to hit the panic button right now, because the Voting Rights Act being stripped, and I'm gonna break it down in a minute, should just be one of the most, if not the most concerning thing that is happening and that this administration is aiming to do. And kind of unapologetically, with the caveat of using some fancy, misleading language to make it sound like that's not what's happening. But that is what is happening in real time. More stuff is happening as I speak. I even just picked up my phone to scroll through a little bit unintentionally, and saw more stuff happening. especially Virginians. Very, very concerning. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965, really not that long ago, without giving an exhaustive summary of what it is, but it's in a nutshell, as you can imagine, the law that establishes equal voting rights for everybody. In that, implicitly, or should be and is equal opportunity, equal access, despite race, sex, gender, right? Everyone should have equal opportunity. I think we just think about, oh yeah, it's America. Everyone has equal access. Not a problem anymore. Or maybe people think it never was. I don't think anyone thinks it never was, but not a problem anymore, right? What has happened in the last couple weeks is a small snippet, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And within that section, something called the Gringles test. Let me pull up my phone. So I pronounce Gingles, sorry. Gingles test is or has been done away with. And in a nutshell, that test was the test that outlawed and was the measuring stick for whether or not districts, the redrawing of districts and maps, voting maps, were racist based on racial discrimination. I've done an episode on gerrymandering before recently, and gerrymandering is essentially the redrawing of maps, voting maps and districts to give a political advantage to one party. That's actually not illegal. I don't have time to go into all that, and I won't bore you with that right now, but not illegal. The thing we need to focus on here is that racial gerrymandering, so gerrymandering, redrawing these district maps based on racial discrimination, was illegal. And these things have been set in place, this Gingles test, to make sure that doesn't happen. So what has happened in the last couple of weeks, that's been done away with. And if that still is confusing, it's supposed to be confusing. So I want to make it very relatable, and I've seen some good breakdowns of what this means. And I think one of the best examples I heard explained, it's okay if you're not a basketball fan, but if you are, this will be very helpful, but I'll still explain it. In basketball, there's something called a flagrant foul. Okay. It's when you foul somebody and there was the result was something over the top or violent. Okay. It's important to know intent does not matter. So a flagrant foul, I believe, in the rules is if there's something like head contact or a wind up, like you're cocking your hand back and you hit somebody. That's an example of a flagrant foul in basketball. It's more than just a normal casual foul. And there's an extra penalty. The other team gets more free throws and they get the ball back versus just you get a whistle or you get a free throw and the other team gets the ball. You get the ball and a free throw, and it's an extra foul. And if you get a second flagrant foul, you're ejected and suspended. Okay. Intent doesn't matter. The results matter. If they do a replay and they see that you punched a guy in the back of the head, whether or not you meant to or not, like maybe you didn't see him and you're swinging your arms around, which does happen. It doesn't matter. If it happened, if your fist made contact with somebody's head, it's a flagrant foul. So keep that in mind. And now think about if the intent was looked at differently. Imagine there's a replay in a basketball game. Someone slaps somebody upside the head. But then the rule was, oh, I'm going to go to that player and say, oh, what did you mean to do that? And the player had the freedom to be able to say, no, I didn't mean to do that. And they could look at the replay and say, oh, man, that looks bad. But I mean, I didn't mean to. That's what's happening here. Sorry. Then what would happen is the ref would just say, oh, okay, well, no foul then. And you just move on. Right? That'd be ridiculous. The other team, the player that got hit in the head would be, up in arms. He'd say, what is going on? I just got smacked in the head. My nose is bleeding. What do you mean he didn't mean to? It doesn't matter. It still happened. that's essentially what's happening here, is that this happening to the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, the Gingell's test being removed, is making it essentially impossible to prove that a racially drawn map is racist. That essentially makes it impossible to prove. But the language is that actually twofold, is that because of how the maps were drawn in the past, that's being claimed as race-based. And so they're given freedom for the states to start redrawing them based on how they were before the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Extremely, extremely concerning. And I often have people say, look, aren't there checks and balances still? Like, don't we have the reason to not worry? And I wish I could say yes, but here's what I'm noticing, even just from this one story, is this all started in Texas when the president forced them to redraw districts. And a lower court in Texas originally said that what they were doing was racial. And then somehow it goes to the Supreme Court and they overturn it, say, no, it's not racial, it's fine. So then started this whole redistricting war, redrawing war. We get over to Virginia, April 21st, the people voted to do a redraw of our map in response to all of this war that was started in Texas by the president. And the people voted and essentially voted, trying to figure out how to say we won. The people won fighting against what Texas was doing, but in Virginia. And then what happened is the Supreme Court has since overturned that election, literally overturned it and said, no, never mind, that was wrong. That was cheating. Over in Tennessee, they wiped out Memphis, an essentially the only predominantly black district in Tennessee, and made it so they have essentially no voice. They scattered the Memphis district into 3 smaller Republican districts. So that was all done by the differences are Texas and Tennessee. The governmental leaders are doing this without voting. But then in Virginia, we did it with a vote. And the Supreme Court still stepped in and overturned it all. As they say, the math is not mathing. Or if you look at it the other way, it is mathing. It makes sense. What is going on here? The black vote, Hispanic vote, is being diluted. What I mean by diluted is essentially what's happening is the opposite of mob mentality. So they are spreading out. Like if you look at a map of Virginia often, or in the area I live in Southwest Virginia, which is a very heavily Republican, red-leaning area. But because we're so adjacent to universities, or even the DC area is so adjacent to universities, and it leans a little blue because of, there's power in numbers. It affects the balance of how Virginia, is often a swing state, and there's disparity and competition in elections. What they're doing is diluting and scattering everyone in Memphis to have no voice and are unable to elect people that represent essentially Memphis in that district. I think it's really, really concerning, guys. I've been talking to my guy who lives in Memphis, kind of giving me the lowdown of what it's like there, what the morale is there. And says it is what it is what you would think. So I'll kind of leave it at that with the Tennessee thing. Couple things come to mind. I think I said hit a panic button. What I mean is there's just not a world in which we can, if we care about democracy, about racial justice, about the marginalized, to sit this one out. It's not about, to me, I'm never going to say this on this podcast, it's not about, hey, you need to vote a certain way every time. Identity politics is not the answer. I would be lying to you if I didn't say that I believe that being informed and voting is important, and not being so frustrated and so checked out that we're not engaged, not willing to vote, go to the polls, um, with our best intentions. It's hard to continue to give advice when people say, well, what can we do if there's resistance to, I don't want to vote. This is literally, I don't know another answer. Practically, that doesn't involve that. There's other things, but does not involve that. I just want to outline some things that I I want you guys to pay attention to and be reminded of for a second. You know, to me, I think some of this stuff has been so obvious for a long time that I forget to recount it to you guys on this platform sometimes. So I just want to recount some things that just show the fragility, dare I say, of our country right now when it comes to race. I'm only going to go back to, 2020. So we got Black Lives Matter, which was a direct response to police brutality. It was met with All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter, looked at as just a pure attack on the nuclear family. DEI, just looked at as this is just reverse racism. Affirmative action, just reverse racism, right? There's books out there, the old book White Fragility, and I'm not saying that's the greatest thing ever. I'm just saying everything that was there to help progress is just immediately cast aside. That book, or everything under the umbrella of that book, was just looked at as, oh, this is just hating on white people. Then you got Project 25, which is a huge one, which was out. Anybody could have read any parts of it. We're living it. We're living the realities of what they said they were going to do. And people discounted it. We said, no, that's not true. It doesn't exist. Even the president himself said, I don't know what that is. We're living it. People who were responsible for writing it were appointed to into powerful positions to be able to live this out and make this come to fruition. Next, I'll even say, I remember talking to people about what the definition of racism was. Of course, there's many definitions over the years out there, but I think if you do a basic Google search, do this in real time with me, it'll tell you what racism is. Obviously, looking at one race as superior to another, and then it's coupled with, often associated with, power, right? I met so many people over the years who push back and they hate that part, right? They hate the part, they think it's too woke to say, well, the power part, I don't know if that's true. We're living it, guys. We're living it. People, the reason that the same people that are pushing back and claiming everything that is not about white people, that is about equality, whether it's DEI, affirmative action, BLM, whatever, the people pushing back on that and labeling it as just simply reverse racism are the people now that have been able to use their power to literally now get rid of the Voting Rights Act. I'll end with this. I keep seeing people celebrate lately just because all the gas. I think, there's this false sense of unity now because all the gas prices are going up. Groceries are getting more expensive, not less expensive. And I keep seeing that the president's approval rating, is upwards of disapproval rating is upwards of 70%. So people are like, oh yeah, okay, everyone's getting it now. One, hard for me to accept because it's a little too late. And two, as I look back to see some of the highest disapproval ratings throughout our country's history, it's almost always tied to a war. A war people don't understand, whether it's 2000 or the economy and money. I'm not saying those are invalid things, but that's what's happening now, right? Or scandal. Got Nixon, George W. Bush, Truman. not Trump. And I think those numbers are poignant. Go with me here because I compare them. I can't get my head out of realizing and being reminded of, in 1967, there was a Gallup poll put out in the country, in the U.S., of people's approval or disapproval of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Do you know what his disapproval rating was? Upwards of 70%, right around the time he was assassinated. I think that's sobering because I think that is so indicative of the sickness of where our country is at when it comes to race. That high of a disapproval rating for the leader of the civil rights movement compared to these presidents. Now, he wasn't president, but these presidents who are leading unjust wars, who are tanking our economy, and who are in scandal. I think this says a lot about the heart of our nation. And says some things that I think are just frankly we're uncomfortable with, and it makes sense that we want to stop teaching about this stuff. One of the late Charlie Kirk's mainstays that he would always say is he would talk about how MLK was a scumbag. That's a quote. And that the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. There's nuance in there of how he explained it, but overall, that language, the language that was used at Charlie Kirk's memorial, the rhetoric behind it, that some people tried to make me think that it was that despite some of that, because there was worship music there, that it was a worship service, a revival service. This is why that just made me sick to my stomach hearing stuff like that. Because we're living the reality. You can't convince me that some of what is going on right now is not because the people is not directly related to people seeking, as they said they would, revenge for Charlie Kirk's murder and death. We're living in a time currently as I speak where people, white people in this case, who are adjacent or have the power to change things are just able to do it. That's why it's so hard to celebrate these false moments of progress that some of y'all want us to celebrate. That's why I always come back to when I answer people who say, well, we had a black president. That's the culmination of racism ending. No, it's not. We had a black president because of black people and people of color turning out in record numbers despite the heavy pushback from white people. That's what happened. And now we're continuing to live in the response and overcorrection of that happening because we didn't like it. All right. That's all I got for y'all today. I had to get on here and give you guys some thoughts on what's going on. Please stay informed. I'm a little doom and gloom today, but I got to be honest. Got to be honest and give you guys some real-time thoughts on what's going on, how to grapple with kind of how to respond to what I think is a very concerning time when it comes to race and justice. Thank you guys for listening. Please don't forget to follow or subscribe to wherever you're listening to the show right now. Share if you think it's helpful for somebody, and please consider joining the Patreon at patreon.com/racially speaking. For as little as $1 a month, you can financially support the show. Appreciate you guys. Talk to you guys next time.